Okay, so good afternoon, everyone. So my name is Yulian Gu. You can call me Mac. So I'll be your section chair for today's section. The set is excited to welcome Jason Wedholm to the inaugural International Project Management Symposium. So Jason is a professional engineer with a civil engineer degree from University of Calgary and is a district manager of Alberta and British Columbia for Graham Infrastructure, based in Calgary. Jason has worked for Graham for all 40 years of his construction career and has been involved in with Calgary West LRT project and several other large bridge and transportation projects in Calgary. Last year, Jason was recognized by Canada Construction Magazine On-Site as one of the top 40 under 40 years age in the Canadian construction industry. Jason is here today and to talk about the emerging contract models for more success project with emphasis on the mechanics and procurement of earlier construction involvement. Now, without further delay, please join me and welcome Jason. And also mention to the audience, please mute yourself. And if you have any questions, please feel free to type in the chat. So our section moderator will ask those questions at the end of the section. Okay, so Jason.
Hi, Mac. Thanks for the introduction. And it was kind of you to coordinate with somebody at my organization to say some nice things about me. So I'm glad somebody is. And thanks for having me today. I'm here today to share some insights on what's known in the industry and becoming talked about more in the industry of early contractor involvement. Myself and a number of other people at Graham have been providing this presentation as well as in various environments and various versions over the last few years. And it was kind of, I think, Bill Black to connect us into the opportunity here to share this with you. So without further ado, I'll move on into the presentation, Emerging Contract Models for Better Projects. So first of all, just a quick overview of what we'll be talking about today. What are the mechanics of ECI? How does it, or why does it work? What are some of the benefits? Explain some of those models those contract models that facilitate an ECI environment. A bit of discussion on Canada's P3 model and some tips for owners that we have on ECI and qualitative based selection. So just a little bit of an overview in terms of what Graham does in the background that we have in having collected some of these thoughts together. It spans across Canada in several different sectors, as indicated on the map. So with experience in a variety of contract models from bid build to IPD in buildings, infrastructure, and industrial sectors, as well as strategic investing group that's part of our company. So why do we like to talk about this? Mainly it's to do with the challenges that we're facing in the industry around projects that go over budget, are late, or end up in disputes. We want to have better project outcomes that are pleasant for our staff and the people working in our industry and for the communities in which they live. There's some issues that have come up that are a challenge for many contractors, and that's risk transfer, and where energy gets placed when we're setting up for a job. Is it creating value, or is it sucking energy for things that aren't good for the outcomes of the project? Procurement behaviors, are they transactional, or are they effective communication? We feel that contractors have a lot to add earlier in the project delivery life cycle, and our company and many others in the industry would like to be part of a true partner culture that's involved in the earlier stages of a construction project. So what is ECI? It's not a contract model in itself. It's a process that can be facilitated by a number of different models. Some contract models facilitated better than others. It's not one size fits all. We advocate for the right contract model for the right type of project. It's something that Graham advocates for, as well as a number of industry associations. The owner's cost of using any contract model should provide a return. So when we think about a job and what disrupts a job or creates problems on a project, such as safety, quality, or cost incidents, one of the root causes that always shows up on a project is the impact of change too late in the project. And when I talk about change, I would encourage you to think about change in the aspect of the field crew that's actually building the job. In that, are they set up that day with the information and the tools that they need to go out and be successful, go home safe, build a quality product in a productive fashion? So there are a number of things that can introduce change into the daily tasks of a work crew, and those things can manifest themselves as safety issues, quality issues, or cost issues, issues with stakeholders, the traveling public on a transportation project, for example. So fundamentally, why does ECI result in better outcomes? True collaboration in the early parts of the project, to sum it up in one sentence. We know that I think it's common knowledge that construction projects do experience unexpected issues throughout this project life cycle, and to overcome those issues often requires a team effort, and having an understanding of the perspectives of all parties to the contract can actually result in open and transparent communication and finding solutions that solve multiple problems simultaneously. If you get involved together early in the contract, when you're developing the work plan and the design, you're dealing with stakeholders, you have that time to gel as a team and get a better understanding and a respect for different people's concerns. And then you can engineer and plan your construction project to address those concerns in a way that meets the common goals of an integrated project team. So just a graphic representation of the ability to influence a construction project. You may have heard the statement, plan the work and work the plan. And that ties back to what I said about minimizing change in the field. This graphic is something we walk through to try to explain what impacts change, and where change is something that drives cost up on a construction project relative to the initial baseline budget. So this graph shows it's what we call a project cost and influence diagram. And this blue line represents the ability to influence the outcome of the job in terms of cost and many other things. This is the spending curve on the job in red. And then these are the stages of the project where you have the ability, where you spend that money and your ability to control what that red line looks like. So in different contract models, you have the ability earlier on to identify potential risks, scope creep, third-party stakeholder involvement that could impact a project, and a good example is in a transportation project or any linear project, underground utilities or geotechnical conditions. So when a contractor gets involved in a project early, we can often take some of our experience from the tail end of the project And
hardware, software, but
sounds like somebody just needs to turn their mute on there. So we can take some of that experience from the tail end of a project where we are dealing with change in the field and sometimes excessive change in the field, and take those learnings and bring them earlier into the design process and be involved in some of the construction details, the staging, and some of the risk management and scheduling, and influence the actual design of the project for success in terms of schedule and constructability, not just how the end product looks in terms of quantities. The most impactful period to do that is early, before some of the big decisions are made. And depending on what types of details you're looking at, there are optimal times in the design life cycle to engage. So a traditional approach to construction projects is what many people are familiar with. Design build is one of the earlier forms of early contract involvement that have been adopted in Canada. This puts the designer and the contractor on the same team with the intent to have contractor involvement in the planning early. Some of the disadvantages of that for an owner are their inability to influence some of the details later on. It's hard to make changes later on because you've asked the contractor to sign up to something early in the game, and you've set a contract scope, and that's what you're stuck with. Making changes later is expensive. The flip side to that is some owners would like to stay involved with the design, but they've chosen the design build contract model, and that can result in disputes because often large design build contracts can be ambiguous. And when a contractor submits a tender and a proposal with a partially complete design, a lot of assumptions form part of that pricing and that design proposal. And if the owner wants to influence the outcome, it can result in disagreements about what the contract conditions actually say. If you want to do a straight design build, it's really important as an owner that you are looking for value creation. You're spending a lot on the pursuit by paying for 3 partial designs, choosing a bidder, evaluating those proposals, and those costs need to result in a low-cost scenario where you've actually paid for somebody to come up with perhaps a more cost-efficient solution than you as an owner have come up with yourself as a concept. And if you're not willing to allow variation and innovation in that design, then it sort of defeats the purpose of design build. So with ECI, there's an opening up of communication. This is a graphic that we talk about, and you know, the item on the right there refers to early field investigation, for example. I alluded to that earlier. Many times as contractors, we'll get involved in a bid and we'll start pouring through the documents and find inconsistencies or concerns, or we'll go out to the field and identify problems that aren't identified as risks in the contract documents. At that stage, though, it's can be very difficult, and because of procurement rules and fairness and transparency, a lot of the communication must be through a formalized recorded channel of information. And if you have a project that's bid build, that's the right way to do it. But as an owner, you need to be confident that your design is complete, so that those questions are few and far between. And you know that when you get 3 bids back, that they're going to be consistent bids. In design build, straight design build, you can have commercially confidential meetings. That sort of thing is usually accommodated, but the ability to discuss risk in the context of base contract documents can be stifled. With ECI, that's something that you can talk about as a group with the designer and the owner and the contractor, and you can talk about risk openly and talk about who's best suited to manage that risk and what you're going to do about it together if a risk evolves onto the project. So these are the benefits that we've come up with an ECI model. So we've already talked about the early influence. We've talked about the communication. One of the other big benefits is all of the funds available to the owner are actually directed towards one design rather than 3 designs that would happen in a bid build competition. And this lends itself well to owners who want to have control over the outcome of the design. So the owner has transparency of the abilities of the contractor before moving to the field. So you have, the pre-construction period to evaluate the competence of the contractor, their ability to communicate and integrate with the team, and develop a relationship and a trust and a common set of goals. Better decision making. So we feel that contractors, our job is to price and schedule projects at a high level of detail. So by bringing that level of detail into the planning earlier in the design of the project, we're able to give more cost certainty, more schedule certainty to the owner with respect to these projects. The other advantage to that is owners can then make stronger commitments to stakeholders, whether it be the traveling public or other stakeholders on the job, and be confident that the construction plan incorporates the needs of those stakeholders. Some continued benefits. So that time spent gelling as a team in the early stages of a job, while the costs are relatively low, it results in the development of a trust-based culture between the owner and the designer and the consultant. By talking about risk and how you're going to mitigate it together, regardless of who ends up contractually bearing the financial outcomes of those risks, you have the ability to help mitigate risks as a team together rather than worry about protecting your backside financially. The early planning allows us to de-risk the project and build contingencies and risk mitigation strategies into our construction plan and our risk allocation plan. Site investigation with the lens of a contractor, so generally at a more detailed level than typically put forward in a standard bid build job, comes out of an ECI procurement. As well, you can get, you don't have to expedite the onboarding period of the contractor late in the design development process. So often you're looking for a contractor in a 4 to 6 or 8 week tender period to become familiar with the project and details. Meanwhile, the owner and the consultant might have had a year or two to do that. Yet the contractor is required to plan the project in a much higher level of detail in that short amount of time. If you give the contractor more time to do that, you result in more cost and schedule certainty, less change, safer, more productive, higher quality projects. You can have open book cost estimating, transparency into that as an owner in an ECI environment, and then you know as well that risks are covered, and you know who's responsible for those risks. Last thing, you can always have an ECI off ramp with an ECI contractor, have an off ramp, and that means that if the project isn't heading in the direction that it needs to head, and you're not comfortable moving into the construction when the daily costs are going to increase, you're able to take that off ramp and tender the project. So here are some of the contract models, common contract models that are out there that facilitate ECI. At least the ones on the right facilitate ECI. The first one there being construction management. The second one, progressive design build, or as CMGC or CCGC as the city of Edmonton calls it, which is a design assist model. one called Integrated Project Delivery, and then an alliance. So the construction management and progressive design build, those same CCGC, they're somewhat similar in their mechanics. Progressive design build, there's only one engineer, and that engineer is contracted directly to the contractor, and the contractor contracts directly with the owner, as opposed to construction management or a CMGC design assist, where the owner still holds two contracts, one with the designer and one with the contractor. All of these contracts can be managed in some other bolt-on processes that come, like public-private partnerships or framework agreements for long-term contracts, such as MSAs and things like that. So just to run through some of these ECI models. So design build, for those who are learning about contracts out there, is when the owner hires an engineer early in the process to develop concept design and a bid package, and then the owner and that owner's engineer go through the process of shortlisting contractor and designer teams, usually down to 3. And then those teams then compete in the design competition that can be evaluated to ensure it's a compliant design. And eventually at the last gate, the owner will check to see, or will select a contractor based on lowest cost. The optimal situation is for this type of design model is when the owner really wants to be hands-off with respect to the design and construction of the product. They're looking for something turnkey, and they are able to select the contractor that provides the best value for money and let them construct what they have proposed for a product. In this case, you need a clear performance specification, ideally not a lot of detail. You want to encourage innovation in the competitive design and bid process. So a sweet spot for a straight design build, greenfield projects where there aren't going to be a lot of unknowns with respect to stakeholder influences or underground utilities. It's important that when you're passing risk to a contractor, that you pass risks to a contractor and a designer that they can actually manage. If they're unable to complete an appropriate investigation of the site and define the constraints, then when you get multiple prices in, and they're likely going to be very different products that you're looking to buy. Construction management. This is a situation where the owner has a designer, and they may hire a construction manager at the same time, which is a contractor at the same time or very shortly after hiring their designer. A pure construction management is often a cost-plus scenario, and the construction manager is involved in providing advice on constructability, scheduling, market knowledge, and does takes on a lot of the tendering role that an owner's engineer often would in a typical bid build environment. This contractor may or may not self-perform scope on the job, depending on the type of job. So a sweet spot for a model like this is when the owner really doesn't have a clear definition of scope, and that means they can't define what they want to be built, and they would like a contractor to work closely with the designer and help with that definition and the packaging. In a traditional CM, often the CM can be chosen with fee as one of the main concerns, along with experience, and this can drive poor behaviors if a low fee percentage is one of the driving factors in how you've selected your contractor. It does cost money to run a business. There is always risk involved with the business. And if CM fees aren't enough to cover the cost of the business and a reasonable profit, then it can drive behaviors where a contractor wants to spend more of the owner's money rather than find a more efficient way to do the job. You need to make sure you're, as an owner, if you do go with the pure CM, that you are looking to compensate a contractor appropriately for the knowledge in the pre-construction services portion and the services portion of the job. So sweet spot, as I'd indicated before, the scope cannot be clearly defined, or you're in a big hurry and you aren't able to get the scope defined before you need to get some of the early works going and the contractor on board. So progressive design build, it's a little bit of a hybrid between a construction management at risk model and a design build model. So in this case, the owner would hire a design build contractor as early as possible. And the purpose of that is that you have one contractor and one engineering firm or a group of firms. You have a team that is highly qualified for the scope of work that you're looking to build, and you work together right from the conceptual stage of the project to develop a defined scope, allocate risk, and then put together a lump sum or a GMP price that's negotiated with clear, defined understanding of who owns which risks. And the benefit of this is you can, again, engineer much of the risk mitigation and efficiencies into the job much earlier in the process. So when you get out to construction, there's less change in the field. The other benefit of this, the contractor is paid along with the designer to do this pre-construction effort, keeping in mind that most bid build contracts require the contractor to verify and validate much of what is assumed in the design. And this allows us to de-risk the project because we get paid to do those checks early on, and it results in less change later for a total cost savings on the job. So progressive design build, when you do convert that project to a lump sum or a fixed price, the risk transfer is similar to design build. The certainty, I would say, is actually stronger because both the owner and the contractor DB team have a mutual understanding of the scope and the risk allocation. So you're much less likely to be dealing with disputes or change throughout the project that couldn't be foreseen. You might still have to deal with unforeseen changes or unforeseen conditions that couldn't be discovered through a thorough site investigation, but at least at that point, the team has gelled and can focus on those changes that are should be few and far between. This is a much more streamlined and cost-effective use of owner funds put into risk mitigation early in the design project rather than into changes later. To do this, it requires a very mature staff from the owner and the contractor and the designer to achieve one team behaviors. You have to develop a culture of trust, and the owner has to be comfortable selecting a contractor mainly on qualifications basis rather than price. So what do we call the sweet spot here? The owner knows what they want. The project is complex or it's brownfield, and there is the potential for many unknowns that would often get discovered during the construction of a bid build project. In a traditional tender, you can go out with a contractor early and do those validations and clearly define the scope earlier in the process, get more price and schedule certainty, higher quality, better stakeholder management. One of the other advantages of a progressive design build is schedule. Often owners, at least in Western Canada, have elected to use traditional design build to compress schedule, as well as transfer risk. And in reality, you end up eating a lot of your total project life cycle in a bid period. It's very expensive. There's a valuation component, and often when you get to the end of it, you're fast tracking a job, and there's insufficient time to actually complete the design effectively for a quality and productive field team. So total costs under a progressive design build model are less as well. You save on procurement. You only have one designer on board. You only do one design instead of 3 designs or 4 designs if you include some of the conceptual stuff that happens with the owner's engineer. You have a fee that's reflective of the agreed risk allocation, which is clearly defined as a team. And if you hire the right team, you should be able to reduce the elemental cost of your projects as well. It's important to remember as an owner that, you know, even though you can't really see what it costs a contractor to bid, unless you're paying them entirely through the honorarium to cover their bid costs, that contractors only win a fraction of the projects that they bid. So they have to build the cost of all their bids into their fees. Otherwise, the business becomes unsustainable. So ultimately, all of the costs of these pursuits and expensive pursuits are costing owners. So design assist, or CCGC, CMGC. A CCGC is a construction consulting general contractor. It's a model that was coined in Alberta by the city of Edmonton, as far as we know, and it's a modification to a CMGC, which is a CM contract, a construction management contract that is clearly intended to be converted into a lump sum delivery of a project, similar to a bid build. So in this case, it's similar to progressive design build, except you've already, as an owner, hired the designer, and you're looking to both a construction contractor into the team. You can do this at any stage through the design. However, our recommendation is you do it sooner. There are certain elements that a contractor can bring to the table at various stages of the design, and if you request an through an RFP process, contractor's understanding of your scope, you can give a contractor the opportunity to demonstrate what value they can bring through that process and through those different phases. So in this case, a risk transfer is similar to progressive design build. You get the same 3-party collaboration. The only there is a slight disadvantage as to it compared to a progressive design build, in that the designer and the builder are not on the same team. And if either the designer or the builder are not truly committed to collaborative culture, or the owner for that matter, it can be difficult to get the types of behaviors that you need to truly add value to the job. So it's incredibly important that the team understands what those behaviors are and commits that to each other, and that those things are measured. Sweet spot, a well-defined project in terms of it, at least the final outcome. But in reality, when you lift up the hood and look under the details, perhaps a lot of unclear scope definition. Linear projects are a really good example of this. Inner city roadworks and undergrounds projects, where you're going to be encountering geotechnical conditions, hidden structures, or utilities that need to be, thoroughly defined and included in your design to reduce change in the field later on. So integrated project delivery is another very collaborative model. It's very specific to some some of the lingo and processes that are outlined under lean construction. And the idea is that you get a tri-party team together of a group of contractors, a contractor or several contractors, the owner and the designer, together develop a target price based on a scope. And then there's essentially a pain gain share. However, the owner is always expected to cover the base costs of the project at the outcome. So you don't see a contractor or designer in a loss situation. But the ability to increase profit for both the designer and the contractor team are based on the ability to find innovation in the project and reduce the project cost below the target price. So this is a great project model, particularly when the end user of the project is looking for value for many years after the project. So whether it's a plant scenario or a building, projects where there's a lot of flexibility in the specification and the level of quality that you're looking for. And I don't mean quality in terms of good quality construction versus poor quality construction. I mean, the finishes and the products that you can buy, and their design life, their effective design life, and those sorts of things. If you have those conversations very early on, you can do value engineering exercises together and make sure you're only building what you need to build, or if an owner needs to invest more in the capital cost up front because they know for the next 30 years that they're going to get better productivity out of that asset, there's ability to know when to discuss and understand when to spend more or spend less. And we call that value creation. It's the one, there's a few disadvantages in integrated project delivery. It can be, it's very labor intensive in terms of the need for the owner and the contractor and the engineer to be sitting around a table making these decisions together. And as well, it involves what we call the marking of individuals. So you need people from each party that can contribute and make decisions on behalf of their organizations. So sweet spot, I'd already mentioned, when the use of the asset in the future, can and the quality of the asset in the future have a major impact on the output, whether it's labor productivity for an office building or a manufacturing plant or something like that. So an alliance has some similarities to IPD in that you set up a target price. The contractor and the engineer are not at risk in terms of the base costs of the project. They have it is possible that they may not make a fee on the job. The owner is expected to pay for all of the direct costs on the project, including the project management costs. The main difference between an alliance and IPD, however, is that the team is fully integrated. So rather than having marking of individuals, as in say 3 or 4 or 5 individuals from each entity involved in the agreement, making decision in groups of 2 or 3, you actually just choose the individual from each entity that is best suited for the job. So just as an example, an owner may have an expert in communications and stakeholder management. In a bid build environment, they may typically do that work. A contractor may also, or a designer may also have an expert in communications and stakeholder management for their firms. Rather than having 2 or 3 of those individuals involved in the project, you would just choose the best individual for the job that is able to perhaps integrate the construction and scheduling information and as well integrate that with the needs and expectations of stakeholders, and thereby reducing the cost of this integrated approach as opposed to an IPD. When to use an alliance, major programs that may go on for many years may have many construction packages and design build packages included in them. You can track key performance indicators, whether it's customer satisfaction, quality, safety, cost certainty, schedule certainty, many KPIs that are actually shared concerns of contractors, designers, and owners can be tracked over a period of time, and you can track improvement as an integrated team on those KPIs, and those improvements in those KPIs can be used to manage profitability for the contractors and designers involved, that owner. Sweet spot projects with such a high risk profile that you aren't going to get any bidders. The scope is undefined, very brownfield environments, contamination, utilities, geotechnical concerns, very complex stakeholder environment. Those sorts of things are where the sweet spot is on an alliance. So how to select an ECI contractor? So in Canada, qualitative based selections is becoming more and more common, both for the selection of engineers and contractors. But in many cases, price still plays a major role, and in many cases, price should play a major role in the contract, but again, or in the tender. But it really depends on how clearly the owner can define the scope and manage and ensure that they aren't going to be dealing with excessive change once the project goes into construction. So some tips for qualitative based selection. Ensure that you give qualifications enough of the weighting in the RFP that you can actually choose a team that's going to find the best solution for your project and is going to work and deliver the types of behaviors that you as a client need to meet all of your goals, not just cost and schedule. For commercial elements, secure commitment on commercial factors. So, there are things that a contractor can control commercially. There are things that a contractor cannot control. So what can be defined early might be a time period or a staff level. You can ask for commercial information that is reflective of what you know at the time of tender. You can even base it on some concept design if you have some of that, and use that as a baseline for changes to the design later. An example of that contract I was involved with a number of years ago was designed to about 70%. It was a unit price contract, and Graham was hired to come in and help finish the design and perform traffic staging and temporary works evaluation. And we had already committed to unit prices, so it was very easy to see where the value was as we proposed changes and ended up moving less dirt, using less concrete, less wasted asphalt, that sort of thing. And then that money went back in the owner's pockets, and then there was also commercial incentive to provide those innovations on the job, which was capped. Capping price growth, which might occur between indicative bid and final contract value. This is something that could be used based on experience from the owner of similar projects. So owners would have records of initial contract values and final contract values historically speaking, and you can use that to put a reasonable cap on what could be expected through the design growth. Caution here, ensure that you are looking at price growth with respect to a very clearly defined scope. I've been involved in some ECI projects where there was a budget value at the outset of the project, and as we went through the job, at the end of the day, at the bottom line, the price was actually the same at the end of the value engineering and ECI process as it was at the beginning. But you couldn't just look at the bottom line. If you actually dove into the scope of the job, you would see that the value engineering process actually had drastically reduced the cost of the initial scope that was presented as part of the functional design for the project, and as well through the process of identifying constructability issues, doing the detailed utilities investigation. It was determined, as well as stakeholder engagement, it was determined that additional scope was required to actually complete the job properly, in terms of mainly utility conflicts that hadn't been identified. So at the end of the day, by bringing a contractor on board, we were able to very, very clearly define those scopes and reduce the cost of the base concept for the project, and use those savings to pay for these additional utility conflicts that needed to be resolved. The advantage of doing it that way was that was all determined prior to finalizing the design. If those utility conflicts had been discovered later during the execution of the project, then the cost of those utility conflict resolutions would have been much more, because the contractor and all the subcontractors would have been stuck on standby dealing with these things, or reacting to change late in the project, which causes safety, quality, and commercial issues. So using key performance indicators during the ECI phase to evaluate contractor suitability. So an example of that, is, partnering, measuring the partnering health of a group. So as a group near the outset of an ECI project, you can define what the success factors are for that group, and evaluate how people are feeling about the value that's being added, whether it's trust, meeting deliverables in a timely manner, whether it be design or schedules, or the deliverables of each of the parties to the contract, whether it's the owner, the contractor, and the designer. And if the group is aligned in their feelings about those KPIs, and can use those KPIs to make improvements, then you're heading in the right direction through the ECI phase. If the three parties are misaligned in their understanding of how that group is performing at the pre-construction stage, and you can't do anything out of it, then maybe in that scenario you need to take an off ramp, because that could get quite expensive when you get into construction if you don't have a team that is gelled. As well, I alluded to this in my example earlier, a gain share and pain share with a cap. So if you go through an ECI process, you can work together to define risks on the project, known unknowns, unknown, and a contingency for unknown unknowns. And you can work together to not spend all of that contingency, and then you can share that contingency with your contractor and or your designer, depending on the amount of risk that each party is also taking in comparison with the opportunity to have a gain as well. So tips for owners. That first one there is specific to P3 projects and financing. I haven't touched on that in this particular presentation, but this is essentially around using bringing the contractor on based on qualifications, then developing the price, If you're looking for financing from that contractor, you can do that later in the game when the scope and schedule are more clearly defined. You can connect the ECI opportunity to construction opportunities. So how I like to describe this is the business model of a contractor is in our people, ability to manage risk and opportunity. So we are going to put our best people on projects where we either have large risks to manage or opportunities to develop. And if you as an owner are looking for the best people to come and help you find the best way to design and construct a project, you want to make sure that we are able to put those minds to work not only for the pre-construction phase, but take that that knowledge that's been inherited and developed through the pre-construction phase and transfer it directly into the construction phase, which reduces the risk for both the owner and the contractor. And that continuity usually results in more efficiency, which it reduces total project cost and usually puts money back in the jeans of the owner as well as the contractor and the designer. Open book cost estimating, you can do that in an ECI environment, and you know exactly what's in there in terms of direct costs, risk, project management, overheads, that sort of thing. Qualifications-based selection, vendor performance management system. So these are two things that many owners are moving towards in the construction industry. And again, it's not always necessary to do this, but in certain complex projects, it's good for both contractors, designers, and owners to include some qualifications-based selection in their bid. As a contractor, it's a little more costly for us to put together proposals, but in reality, it forces a more consistent approach to detailed planning at the time of the tender. So the owner knows that the contractor has actually gone through the process of properly scheduling the job and breaking down the drawings, explaining how they're going to do the job. That way the owner can look at multiple prices, multiple construction plans, and get a sense they're actually comparing apples to apples, rather than being forced to select that low bid that's 20 or 30 or 40% less than everybody else, and not knowing whether that it was actually innovation that's created that value or a simple mistake that is going to result in claims later on, or a quality issue or a safety issue. Vendor performance management system. This is a feedback loop that goes with qualification-based selection. Many owners have implemented this sort of thing or are thinking about implementing it. We think that this is a good tool, but it is important when using a vendor performance management system as a client that you have a way of baselining that across your representatives, so that you know you're getting apples to apples comparisons on vendor performance management from job to job and from project manager to project manager. So that just about sums up this presentation for me. It's time for questions if anybody has any.
Anybody having any questions? It's the time. You can either type in the chat or ask the question directly. Okay, until others get ready, I think I have a question. First of all, thank you very much for giving us a vivid and detailed picture of how project delivery systems are evolving in the industry, and what are the new ways and the trends the industry is going through. Now, when it comes to different project delivery methods, and earlier, I know general understanding is as these delivery method changes from design build to at the top end alliancing, the costs they think are going up, like it showed in one of your earlier slides. So why would an owner, as soon as they see, okay, costs are going to be higher, how do you convince an owner about all the other advantages these different project delivery methods can bring, such as CMGC?
I'm just going to go back. I don't think that graph was suggesting that costs are consistently going higher.
Yeah.
So what it is here is importance of end user input or level of effort, cost by owner. So this is the owner's involvement as in the owner's people on the job. So, if you do a bid build, you may, as an owner, contract the administration of the contract out to an engineer. You've contracted the building out to the contractor, the construction goes out to the contractor. And as an owner, if it's something fairly typical that you build over and over again, your own staff as an owner may have very low involvement in the project. A pure design build, the way a design build is intended to be, also has a low input from the owner. And what this is meant to illustrate is how much involvement does the owner want to have in the entire process. So when we talk about integrated project delivery and alliance, these are the types of the sweet spot for those projects are where the owner wants to be heavily involved in the details of what is being built. So if it's a building that they're going to use for many years, or a manufacturing plant, or something that has to be very, very detailed and fit for purpose and very specific to what that owner's business is, they may want to involve a lot of their own people in the design and the construction. So it requires an owner that's very sophisticated and has a lot of knowledge about about the actual asset that's being built. So that's what this is demonstrating is how much the owner needs to be engaged themselves in that entire process. The cost to the owner of the actual project is reduced by selecting the right model for the right project. So certain projects that are relatively simple, and there's a large level of confidence that the engineering firm that has designed it is able to clearly define the scope. The owner has been able to clearly explain to the engineer what they want. Then I would suggest a bid build is the right model. Then you just go out to tender. The contractors can clearly understand what needs to be done and what they're going to be measured to, and then it's just a matter of market. If you're concerned about getting bidders that don't understand and read your specifications, you can put a pre-qualification, which is relatively low cost, in front of that bid build, and then shortlist those contractors that have the capability and will read your specification. So when you get those 3 or 4 prices, they're actually apples to apples and not apples to bananas. Where you are not able to clearly define risk or scope early throughout any part of the design without the help of a contractor, that's where these models in the middle are quite an advantage and reduce costs. So we've seen both in design build environments where the risk is with the contractor, or in bid build environments where the risk is with the owner, we've seen productivity losses of easily 30 to 40% as a result of conflicting needs of stakeholders, underground utilities, and geotechnical conditions. Those 40 to 40% impacts to the cost either go back to the owner or the contractor. The only way to reduce those costs is to identify that scope earlier in the process so that it can be efficiently integrated in the construction plan. So that's how these models, when selected for the right projects, actually reduce the total project cost.
Excellent. Thank you, Jason. So Rick Anderson is asking a question here. What do you feel is the most effective contract delivery for dealing with supply chain issues in our modern world?
That is a very challenging question. I think there's a couple ways to deal with that. And when you think about a contract model, and I think it depends on your knowledge as an owner and how much you can determine in-house and the knowledge you might have with an engineering firm that you've already hired. If you know, I'm going to use an example. Right now, the price of steel has increased 200 to 300% over the last last year and a half. And that is a fairly isolated scope. So if you know that as an owner, what you could do is you could do a bid build, and if you know everything else except that there's one major component of your project that's a supply chain issue, and it's limited to cost, you could isolate that risk from the bid and simply say, give us your baseline as of this date, and then we will, once we've reviewed your proposal and selected, if something's changed in 4 to 6 weeks, because sometimes they're only guaranteeing that price for 2 to 3 days, we can cover off those extra costs separately. Then you know the contractor, then you know the bids that you're getting from the contractor are specific to a risk that they can manage, and that you have an avenue to discuss that risk. If you're dealing with a series of supply chain issues in terms of cost fluctuation, potential delay to the project, all of those sorts of things, then I think it's very wise to get into either a progressive design build or a construction management arrangement. And the reason I say that is then you can rely on the two-way communication with the contractor around those commodities. And the advantage to that is there's twofold. One, how do you know when you go to a competitive tender that you're getting apples to apples and that you're getting the best price? Well, the only way to do that is to have a very clearly defined scope. And scope isn't just defined in terms of the physical product, but as well the schedule, right? So if you are able to fix that early, then you can move more into your traditional models. But if you know that the schedule's uncertain, you have stakeholder issues you're dealing with through your design. We've seen many, it's very common knowledge in the industry that we see the tender periods slide from our clients. There's a lot of decisions and stakeholders involved for owners that need to be addressed prior to actually putting a project out in a traditional tender. And all of those variables create uncertainty for the contractor. So what's going to happen is you're either going to get very high pricing from the contractor, or you're going to get change orders from the contractor if the owner clearly has retained that risk. So to manage those in a fluid fashion, you can start that two-way conversation earlier in a progressive, collaborative environment, and then you can actually decide as a group when to package out different things. So I'll use steel as an advantage. As another example, right now steel prices are very high. They're probably going to go down a little bit. So if you're tendering a job today that has a whole bunch of steel in it, it'd be really smart to hire a construction manager and develop a project schedule and then decide what's the latest. If we think things are trending down in cost, when's the latest that we can actually put out the tender and still meet the schedule, right? And then you can start talking about time in terms of money. And if you can talk about time in terms of money, then you can make better decisions about when to procure your products. If you don't know the time or the money, and you can't have that conversation with your contractor, which is the case in a true bid build or design build environment, you could end up in disputes or surprises later in terms of poor schedule performance and cost performance that somebody has to bear.
Awesome. Thank you. Thank you very much, Jason. On behalf of SAIT, I'd like to thank you again for joining us today and sharing your experience with that experience and the expertise with us. We appreciate it very much. Thank you, everyone, the participants who attended this session as well. We'll see you all next time in another session in the future. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much, Jason. Have a good day.
Thanks for having me. Have a great evening.
Yeah, thank you.